Greetings and welcome to Realpolitik. This is James Tracy. Our guest on this episode is Danny Ledonne. Danny Ledonne has a very interesting story. He is first of all, a graduate of Emerson College in Boston, and he earned his Master of Fine Arts degree at American University in Washington, D.C. Danny is a videographer and an artist. He's served in camera and grip electronic departments on dozens of short films and music videos, as well as several independent features. He's also worked as director of photography on several award-winning short films, editor for several feature-length documentaries, and produced films in the wilderness of East Africa, Alaska, and the Galapagos Islands. Now, what makes Danny's story so interesting and how we really cross paths is that Danny was working at a university as an adjunct instructor. This is Adams State University in southern Colorado. And he set up a blog and began really looking into the university administration's activities, its dealings. And this was in the fall of 2015. As a result of this free speech off campus, Danny was forbidden to set foot on campus. He was given a no trespass order, which is really amazing. And in addition, his activities on campus as a videographer were really challenged because of this no trespass order that was ultimately issued by the administration. Now, what Danny did was he was able to enlist the services of the American Civil Liberties Union, and they filed a suit for him against the university. And this involved, of course, violation of his constitutional rights, including the First Amendment and including due process. So without further ado, Danny also has a podcast on his website called watchingadams.org. And we interviewed each other. Now, I had to edit this down, and I really chopped out a good portion of the interview involving me, him interviewing me, because I wanted to focus more so on him. Most listeners of this program and podcast are well aware of my situation. Fewer people, I think, are really aware of what Danny has gone through and how he's prevailed against the university administration there at Adams State.
Let me ask you then, and then we can kind of switch gears and talk about my case, which obviously I'm free to share at this point. So maybe you can interrogate me a little bit.
Okay.
In your case, ultimately, what bigger picture message would you like my audience, your audience, to gather from this? Is this ultimately about tenure and its protections and lack thereof? Is this about faculty being persecuted for their controversial or unpopular views outside of the classroom?
I think all of the above. And what is stated in my complaint quite plainly, and I think this is the takeaway overall, is that if this happens to you, Danny, or I, or any other faculty member, doesn't matter if they are if they're someone who's an instructor on contract, such as the case with you, if they're tenured, that's irrelevant. If they, in fact, instructors and adjuncts and so forth, as you know, are more vulnerable than tenured faculty members, at least in theory. But if they can do this to myself, then it can be done to anyone. And it could be argued that the institutions such as yours, such as mine, are simply flexing their muscle and seeking to create precedent. And this is what they have been doing for quite some time.
Absolutely. I think, your case, even more so than mine, your case really does conjure up memories of the War Churchill case in CU Boulder. Of course, War Churchill being someone who made controversial statements after 9/11 about those involved in the incident, and for those statements he was hunted for years over any minor academic infraction, including not citing the source that cited the source of something that he was writing about, and so he was pursued for these academic plagiarism charges, when clearly the case was really about him referring to people inside the Twin Towers as little Eichmanns on 9/11. So you, in my view, you have published some heterodox and controversial views about the Sandy Hook school shooting. It sounds like about 9/11 as well. Your publishing was brought up in mainstream media in ways that the university probably wasn't pleased with. And so then the hunt was on, and in your case, these outside activity forums became the pretext for something they wanted to do anyway. Is that kind of on the right track?
I think so, yes. And if someone can be targeted and they can be deprived of their livelihood and what they've spent a significant portion of their life training to do, that can all be taken away, then anyone is fair game. And
yeah, I mean, one of the things that's important about tenure and academic freedom is that your training and your background are supposed to inform you to seek out the truth wherever you may find it. And however disturbing someone might regard your views, or at least the time at your suggestions of the Sandy Hook school shooting, you have a background in this area, and you're using the best available training that you've had to give the public an alternative view of what's happened. And that should absolutely be, protected First Amendment speech. It should be, enshrined in, the halls of academia for academic freedom. And the opposite seems to be true in your case. So I come across your post about my blog, or about my situation with Adams State, and I found a number of things in there to be somewhat insightful. So I kind of wanted to talk you through that, but maybe you can start by giving your general impression of my case, or questions you might have of me.
Sure. This was a repost from another blog, and I provided some prefatory remarks. The author goes by the online nom de plume of Professor Doom. And so I reposted the article itself, because I thought that, yes, it did make a number of very astute observations. This person obviously has a great deal of experience dealing with university administrations themselves. And so I was unaware of the case, and I was immediately interested, in part given the fact that you had champions of civil liberties come to your aid,
right.
The ACLU. And we should, for my audience, briefly discuss what the dynamics of the case involved. You were an instructor at Adams State University in Alamosa, Colorado, which is in southern Colorado, on contract, and yet you have an undergraduate degree from Emerson College in Boston, an MFA from American University in Washington, D.C., in media production, media arts. You were working in the Department of Mass Communication there at Adams State, but you also have your own production company, and you've done work with a variety of organizations in terms of just video production for them, promotion for them, documentary work. You're involved in, I believe, the South Colorado Film Festival as well as the director. So you have your tentacles in a variety of areas, so to speak. You have a lot on your plate as a media professional. And part of the suit, your lawsuit against Adams State and its administrators, involves really the injustice, not only your violation of free speech, but also your livelihood, in that you had to access the university quite a bit in order to perform your duties. You were contracted by the university for your company to do videos for them, to record performances for other organizations that might be performing there at the theater. And you were slapped with a no trespass order after you started up a blog where you posted some things that were critical of the Adams State administration.
Yeah, that's all true. So a little bit of background. I grew up in Alamosa, so this is my hometown. Graduated from high school here, did college and grad school, as you've said. I also did a lot of work in the community with the Boys and Girls Club, the local community radio station. I also taught Taekwondo. So I had a variety of interactions in the community. I had really deep roots in the community.
Okay.
And I was invited to start teaching at Adams State at a time when they had radio and newspaper, but no video production. And so the department chair invited me to develop coursework in video. And so I was excited because at the age of 28, I was basically going to start my own film school. And that was a really exciting prospect. So I spent 4 years teaching at Adams State, first as an adjunct instructor and then as a visiting assistant professor. And I think like most faculty, I started by kind of focusing on my content area and just doing the best I could to create a great program. I worked on founding the Southern Colorado Film Festival so that we had an annual way to bring in other films and filmmakers as well as showcase student work. And in addition to that, of course, teach coursework, stay involved in the community. I also got involved in some activism, protesting the Iraq and Afghanistan wars at a weekly protest that we would hold on the edge of campus called Peace Watch. And in addition to that, I also was a plaintiff in a lawsuit brought against the Alamosa School Board because they had sold off a piece of former elementary school property to be developed into an RV park when there was a competing offer to turn it into a community garden farm park program at a higher rate. So we just basically alleged that the school district was doing favors to some of their local business friends rather than taking the highest value for the dollar at the behest of the taxpayers who, own this public property. And we settled out of court. We won that suit, and that property is now developing as an agricultural park called the Rio Grande Farm Park. So I had quite a bit of activism. I, of course, am a controversial figure because in 2005 I created a video game about the Columbine school shooting. It's an interactive role-playing game that invites players to really deeply understand the motives behind the two shooters. And I went on to produce a documentary about the reactions to the game and other games that have serious content that are trying to deal with the real world and not merely entertain us with, fanciful characters. So anyway, all of this happened. I applied twice for a full-time position at Adams State, and both times I was not one of the finalists, even though I was already doing the job with very strong recommendations and evaluations. So that was confusing.
Yeah.
And then I filed an open record request to see the score sheets for my job application. And upon seeing them, it was clear what was happening. There were one or two committee members who repeated both searches, even though I was assured that they wouldn't, that there would be a new group of judges for the second year. And they really, I think, unduly targeted me. They gave factually inaccurate reviews of my credentials. And so I thought, okay, this is a rectifiable problem. I'm going to take this back up to the administration and file a grievance. And so I went through their internal process, which resulted in them saying there was no wrongdoing. And then I sort of tried to propose a compromise, which is, hey, why don't you hire who you want for this job, but we can create a new position that's half-time teaching for me and half-time creating video content for the university, which was I was also on contract for doing. And essentially the response was, no, we're not creating a teaching position, and we're cutting your video contract that I already thought I had. So I went from the annual video contract to nothing, in addition to teaching to nothing. And so when both of those things happen, I'm like, all right, I clearly have, and at this time they were cutting off my university email account. I was told I could no longer go to administrative meetings because I was still attending faculty senate and doing other shared governance activities on campus. And so a string of things started happening. And around this time, I created a blog called Watching Atoms that was really an effort to communicate what was going on at the university, given that there was no publication that was currently doing that. All that we would get is the fanfare from the official channels.
Was the blog started in the summer or fall of 2015?
Yeah, I bought the domain watchingatoms.org around the 6th of September 2015. At that time, I was not teaching. I no longer had a video contract. And so in that sense, I felt like I had nothing more to lose, and I didn't have a lot of liability that I could, create this website. And I knew there were a couple things that had to be done right away. The university hadn't been publishing its salary data, and so I filed a records request and published the salary data.
Wow.
And it was obvious why they didn't want it published, because there were many administrative positions making far and away more than they should, and many faculty were making much less than they should. So that kind of created a stir. But I was still the director of the Southern Colorado Film Festival, which was then in its third year, and we were moving toward our October premiere of that year's films. And on the 2nd of October of that year, I went to the Board of Trustees, signed up to make a public comment, and I basically said, look, I've appeared before you before. I've given you all the documentation, to basically petition some sort of compromise or some sort of addressing of the issues I see with the hiring process. That hasn't happened. So I'm here today to request some mediation, and there's a community mediation service we could go to. So I literally was in there requesting to sit down and talk, to find a way to figure things out. And instead of that, about 12 days later, the police chief from the university campus served me with this order stating that I would be arrested if I set foot onto campus, and it gave no official reason. It was just an incredibly vague letter. And so I thought, well, I think the public deserves to know how I've been treated, and so I sent that to some journalists who published it, and that's when the controversy really began to escalate.
So as an academic, a fellow academic, I'm interested to know, first of all, how many people are in the mass communication department at Adams State? It seems like a pretty small department. I looked on their website, and the director was the only person listed as a faculty member.
Yeah, it's a small department within a larger department. So English Theater Communication is one of the larger departments on campus. Mm-hmm. But, when I arrived, there were 2 faculty members. I became the third, and I was tagging along as an adjunct, but with the hope and expectation that it would become a full-time position. Since then, the program has really kind of sputtered, and 2 years in a row now, they've hired someone else who hasn't stayed. And so you are seeing there's only one faculty member who's constant, and I guess they still haven't updated the bio with the other person that they've again hired. So there's been quite a bit of turnaround, and it's also a small department.
Well, it sounds like 3's a crowd.
Yeah, apparently it is. I had a choice, really, at the outset that I could pursue a full-time instructor position, which would be non-tenured, and that would mean surrendering the tenure line that was kind of in existence. But when that professor left, they rewrote their job description to basically be what I was doing, and so that's what I applied for. But I couldn't, in good conscience, take a full-time instructor position knowing that I was contributing to the erosion of tenure in higher education, which I see as a big problem.
Yes, I do as well. And it seems to me as if perhaps you are a victim of your own success. Sometimes academics, especially in smaller departments like that, and they've been there for a while. I don't know what the case is in your department, but they don't want to see someone new coming in who raises the bar in terms of performance, in terms of their activities, their effectiveness as as an artist in your case, or a researcher, or in teaching and instruction. They don't like that competition. I don't know if that was perhaps a dynamic there as well.
I've certainly made that observation, and it's difficult to do so with a degree of modesty and humility, but I certainly have made that observation. I would simply say that, in the time I was there, for years, there was an interest and a need to get blinds installed in the computer lab. And it just seemed like this fifth wheel that no one could figure out how to contact facilities to get them to do it. And so it's ridiculous, right? But I decided that I was going to make it a priority to do that. And so basically every week I called facilities, referenced the work order number, and pretty soon facilities knew who I was. They knew I wouldn't quit calling them. They went and they found the work order, and a week later the blinds were installed. Right. And so to me that just says, that the existing people there began to feel threatened by my capacity to get things done. And when when the university banned me, they started using this language about how I had threatened people, or people felt uncomfortable, or people felt threatened. Right. But what I saw is, well, yeah, they felt threatened. I was upstaging them. I was getting things done. I was, challenging and questioning authority figures. They didn't like any of that. And so then they found this pretext for removing me from the campus.
They were just contented with absorbing their large salaries and not having to work for it, or perhaps work as much or perform as well. So what was the response to the local media's publication of the order preventing you from going on campus?
Yeah, well, to be clear, the local media hasn't been a terribly large help. And that is because the local newspaper, their primary advertiser is the university. And the university gives the newspaper the Organization of the Year award. So there was just so much. I mean, it's a small town. It's small town politics. Everyone knows each other. And so no one would dare double cross Adams State, because I felt like that this is a little kingdom. And the people that run Adams State University are the kings, the queens, the bishops, and the lords. They distribute most of the gold in the kingdom, because Adams State is the largest employer in a pretty economically depressed part of the state. Right. And so no one wanted to double cross Adams State University. And I was just like, someone's got to do something here. So the analogy I use is kind of like around the time that I created Watching Adams, I went back and I watched Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. And so I was watching The Dark Knight, I was watching the Batman movies, and I'm like, this guy Bruce Wayne realizes that the city of Gotham is so corrupt, and that he is, as Bruce Wayne, wouldn't be able to really affect change. But if he creates this image of something greater, that if he becomes the Batman, then maybe he can start pushing back on these really corrupt institutions. And so for me, Watching Adams was a way of saying, I know a lot of people inside Adams State can't come out publicly, but I can work with them, protect their identity, and start publishing articles and documents, in a way similar to what Julian Assange has done with WikiLeaks.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, right. So
that was kind of my inspiration, is if I created a space where people could review documents, people could make comments, where people can review articles and commentary without fear of retaliation, things could get better. And we're in the middle at Adams State of some really controversial issues that are really striking at the heart of the university. So I'd encourage people to go and look at that. But basically, when I was at Adams State, my colleagues and I would hit these institutional roadblocks so quickly to try and even figure out how decisions are made at Adams State, and why it seems like there are a few people who can make an end run to the administration and get what they want, but the rest of us can't. Or there were people who were just making way more than they should, or had all this undue influence. And so when I was at Adams State, in the official channels, we formed a group called the Campus Advocacy Group. We met regularly. We drafted kind of white papers and policy ideas to improve the university, like a nepotism policy, which we didn't have, like a dual career policy for spouses who didn't have work and are really struggling, and tried to understand shared governance at Adams State. And
Right.
for our well-meaning unpaid efforts, that whole group was kind of driven underground, and many people who were in it have now been chased off campus through constructive dismissal or attrition or being banned. So it's a really fundamental campus culture problem that we've encountered.
And how did the ACLU become involved in your case?
Sure. A lot of people ask me that. So when I was banned from campus, I spent several weeks, essentially a month, trying to figure out what I had done and figure out if there was a way we could resolve this, or what they alleged that I had done,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I'm like, I never threatened anyone. I don't even understand what this is about. Like, I get that some people are upset that I've been pushing back, but I've always done so in civil, professional manner. And so I attempted many times to say, I can't even appeal this letter that you've given me until I know what I'm accused of having done. That there's no due process unless I understand what I'm being accused of doing. So I asked flatly, what law or policy are you accusing me of having violated? And in response, I got these very vague, anonymous quotes about how someone felt annoyed or disturbed, or that my communication was ominous, but they never cited anything that I did. They never cited anything that I said during this process.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, all right, there's no way that we're going to resolve this internally. And so I started contacting, and by the way, there were a lot of attorneys who wanted to take this case because they saw how much of a slam dunk it was in some sense. But I decided that rather than pursuing large monetary damages, I wanted to kind of make a more principled statement about civil liberties. And so I chose the ACLU because I thought, regardless of the outcome, the fact that the ACLU would be willing to represent me would speak to kind of the caliber and the merits of my case.
Mm-hmm.
And so over a course of several months, in communicating with the legal director for the Colorado Foundation of the ACLU, we located an attorney who would be my lead attorney and partnered on the case. And in February of 2016, we filed suit against Adams State. Curiously, that the very same day, the university asserted, bring it on. We're glad that this case is being brought because now we can finally prove what we've been saying all along about Mr. Ledonne's threatening conduct, and that never happened. When we went to our preliminary injunction hearing, the defense called no witnesses, and the defense presented no documents as evidence. Basically, it was our case entirely, and it was pretty clear that they were looking to settle as soon as possible, because once the Attorney General got the case to represent Adams State in a court of law, they realized that they had no substance on which to defend their client's actions other than to make a kind of vague general argument that nobody has, as a matter of right, a right to access a university campus. So they were making this abstract technical argument about how anyone could be banned for any reason at any time or for no reason at all because they didn't have a material interest to be on a public university campus. They never tried to argue that I actually threatened anyone or engaged in harassment or whatever.
Now, did your counsel achieve discovery, or was it settled before that process could actually play out?
Oh, no, I call it the discovery channel because we definitely went through a discovery phase for our case. And it ended up being essentially just a really dysfunctional version, a really expensive and protracted version of what I'd asked for initially, which is tell me what you allege that I've done. And so through discovery, we pushed them on exactly why Mr. Ledonne was banned from campus. And when we pushed them, the university president, Beverly McClure, and the police chief, Paul Grahowski, who were named in the lawsuit, they couldn't come up with a specific thing that I had done. And every time we asked the question, they would kind of give a different, answer. They'd say, well, it wasn't any one thing. It was a pattern of behavior. And, well, it's not this one thing he said. It's that overall, in general, he had to be banned from campus.
What's really so amazing about all of this is that these administrators, once again, are placed in these positions because they can allegedly handle them. And what we find, unfortunately, when they do something wrong in a very profound way, they fall back on the taxpayers of the given state for legal representation, even when they're being sued in their individual persons.
Yeah, precisely. And, the resolution of the case really was just in keeping with the entire ordeal, because we settled on the 28th of June. We went to an arbitration service who basically put both parties in separate rooms and then walked between the rooms until the parties could agree on a mediation statement. And I can't go into what took place that day, but I think the results speak for themselves, which is that we left with an agreement that I was allowed unconditionally on campus like any member of the public, and that the ban was lifted, and that that we would receive a $100,000 settlement that was then divided between the ACLU and myself. There was no clause that stated that we couldn't speak publicly about the case. There was no clause that stated that we couldn't continue to disparage one another or whatever you'd characterize it as. So it was clearly just kind of walking away with the ban having been lifted and a settlement being awarded to us as a means of resolving the matters of the lawsuit. And so when that happened, about a month went by, because we then had to satisfy the terms and they had to cut a check for the legal counsel, etc. And once that had happened, we issued a press release at the ACLU. The university issued a press release, which is like night and day. I encourage people to go on the documents page and read the press release that Adams State first published on, I believe, the 25th of July, in which they stated that the judge ruled in their favor and that Adams State was found to have admitted no wrongdoing. And they didn't mention the amount of the settlement. They didn't even mention that the ban had been lifted. And then they inserted a whole paragraph of flowery language about how Adams State's mission is to serve underserved students and an economic – I mean, it was just like it had nothing to do with the case.
Now, this Adams State president, Beverly McClure, she real kind of micromanager, or is she really conscious? Apparently she is, of exactly how her administration and she personally are perceived in the community.
Yeah, I would say overall my sense is that she really values the public image that she personally has, and by extension the university. But if you look at the kind of conduct and decision making that she's made, she is someone who really prizes that the image over the substance of the university's conduct. And so you can see in that decision that it was very important to appear as though that they prevailed, even though the material terms of the case clearly didn't suggest as much. And my other sense is that the only reason the case was resolved at all is because cooler heads in that room prevailed, and that there were others on the legal counsel, etc., who really ensured that Adams State would reach a settlement. Because if it were up to Beverly McClure, this would have gone on forever, and she just was adamant about never backing down, even when she was just clearly, I mean, she was making statements such that she told the faculty and the student senate on separate occasions that I was on a watch list with the Colorado State Police. And so my attorneys dug into this every way we could think of. I called the State Patrol. I called the Alamosa Police. There's no such thing as a police watch list. They don't maintain them. I'm certainly not on one. We have no idea where she would kind of conceive of this watch list. It doesn't even exist. And so statements like that, statements like saying that I was engaged in terrorism, which she told the local newspaper, it was just so indefensible that it was clear other people had to intervene to bail the university out of this case because it was not going to work in their favor.
You were a longtime community resident. Was there a discernible effect on their statements that you could see in your interpersonal relations with maybe friends, colleagues, and things of the like?
Oh, absolutely. There is a commentary on Watching Adams called, I think it's called The Scarlet Letter, or Danny's Scarlet Letter, that invoke the original Nathaniel Hawthorne novel about the Scarlet Letter, and the idea that in a community, even if these allegations are never proven true, the fact is the university administrators are seen as authority figures and are generally believed by virtue of their authority. You know, they had a thick binder that Beverly McClure would take to these meetings and say, this is his file. But it was, we saw the inside of it. It was mostly my correspondence with them and my efforts to try and get hired and my documentation of why I'm qualified to be at the university. But she never showed it to anyone. It was just this prop that she would hold up to try and sway the community to believe that, you know, I was this nefarious individual. And yet, you know, the funny part is, even amidst all this controversy, there were requests being made on my behalf so that I could go back onto campus to film the dance recital and an art reception. And so they granted me access to the campus on a provisional basis so that I could film these events, even though I was still officially banned, which I think just eroded the whole assertion that I was a threat to campus. Because if I was a dangerous threat to campus, why was I allowed on campus with large bags that contained my camera gear? There was no security, no searching of my bags, and I was now filming a children's dance recital with hundreds of people in this auditorium. And at that point, people thought the university can't be serious about what they're saying. They never filed charges. They didn't get a search warrant. They didn't get a restraining order. They didn't do any of the things that someone would do if they seriously believed that someone was a threat. All they did was say, this Ledonne guy, he's annoying us, he's making us look bad, we got to deal with him, so we're going to ban him from campus. You know, and that's the sad thing, is that the university cynically leveraged the real fear Americans have of rampage shootings in America, of school shootings in America, and cast me as the next, you know, Columbine or Sandy Hook massacre shooter as a way to justify getting me off campus. And that's, I think, what a lot of people took exception to. The university wasn't honest about why they did it, and they played off this, you know, falsified pretext of fear to get what they wanted, at least for a time.
And are you overall satisfied with the outcome, and do you have any regrets about having set up watchingadams.org?
You know, people asked me years ago if I had any regrets about creating the Columbine video game and creating a website where people could discuss the Columbine game. And I always said my one regret was that I created the game anonymously, and a year later someone outed me as the creator. And then it created the wrong kind of controversy because it came about who is the guy who made this game, rather than what is the game trying to say about school shootings and about our society at large. So with Watching Adams, I said, I'm going to be upfront right from the beginning. The About page states clearly this is a project by Danny Ledonne. And so I tried to learn from my previous mistake that when you're going to do something controversial, the best thing to do is to get ahead of the controversy by owning it, by saying, I'm the person who made this, this is why I made it, and encouraging feedback and dialogue. I'm sure there are people out there who wished I didn't settle the case, who wished I would have gone on to actually go to a jury trial. I think that could have been interesting, especially because deposing under oath Beverly McClure would have been interesting, as well as the board chair, Arnold Salazar, and others who were involved in the case.
Yeah.
But I was also looking at my own life in a practical sense, because that would have meant 18 months, maybe as much as 2 years, preparing for trial, still being banned from campus, still sort of being seen as this bugaboo in the community, or this potential boogeyman that the university had to ban for everyone's safety.
Right.
And I wanted to move on with my life. All I really ever wanted was to have the ban lifted. And so the fact that we could get that to happen was what I wanted. So overall, I'm very pleased with what's happened so far. I certainly have learned a lot from it. And it's also been great connecting with people such as yourself. So I thank you for the opportunity to kind of cross-publish our interview today. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as well.
Well, thank you, Danny. And likewise, I'm happy to be on your podcast, and I appreciate you being on the Real Politic program.
Great. Take care.
Okay, you too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.